Greetings, adventurers. This is Kazu of the Wormforge, and today I have for you the definitive Baldur's Gate 3 class tier list. We're going to be ranking all 12 of the classes in Baldur's Gate 3, and I have the tier list here, but I also have a spreadsheet, which the link for this is going to be in the description below. But basically what we're going to be doing in this video is ranking each of the classes between the S plus rank all the way down to the B rank, because spoiler alert, in terms of the general classes for Baldur's Gate 3, there's no wrong choices. All of them are freaking awesome. You know, I'm probably not going to rate any of these very low, but we are going to be using ranking criteria and rating them on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being absolutely useless, 10 being god tier and even broken, for things like combat effectiveness and fun factor. And each class, depending on the score that they have, it is going to put them into a rank. S plus being something that I would 100% recommend for any run or difficulty, because the build or the class is going to be strong, fun, and versatile. And then we go all the way down to a B, which is going to be really just for those who have specific niche in terms of interest for the class that they want to play, because it's going to be a lot more oriented towards a specific play style or a specific type of build. I do want to say just ahead of time that, again, none of these classes are bad. And each one of the classes, I'm going to include a link to a build guide video, either one from myself or one from other Baldur's Gate 3 content creators. That way, if you do find that this class is something you're interested in playing in your next playthrough, you're going to have a quick reference to actually jump into a build, or at least to get inspiration and ideas for a build of your own that you can then use later on. So I hope you guys find this video informational. If you do, please like, subscribe for more Baldur's Gate 3 content, and leave a comment with your favorite class in general, or maybe even any discussion you might have based upon the tier list here. So let's dive straight into the video. We're going to explain the rating system, and then we're going to jump into rating each one of the 12 classes for Baldur's Gate 3. All right, so before we get into our tier list and start ranking the classes, I do have to break down the ranking criteria as well as the tiers. So we have S plus, S, A, and B. S plus tier is going to be for classes that I would recommend 100% of the time for any run on any difficulty, because aspects. They're going to deal great damage, they might have good crowd control, they are going to be a lot of fun to play, and they're going to be well-rounded where you can adapt your build depending on the needs of the party. An S tier class is going to still be very strong and powerful, but it might have some drawbacks or some dependencies, things that make it so I cannot 100% of the time recommend the class, but they're still going to be great. A tier is going to be for classes that are strong, but they're going to have more major drawbacks. Maybe they only work for a few types of play styles. Maybe they don't bring good out of combat utility. Maybe they have some sort of significant drawback that would otherwise take them out of S tier. And then B tier is going to be for everything that is below A tier. There's only going to be one class, I think, that is going to be ranked B tier. And again, that's the reason for that is because it's only going to fit a specific playstyle, or its power level in general is just significantly weaker than the other classes by comparison. Now, you'll see that there is a score associated for each of these tiers, and that's because we are going to be ranking the classes based on 5 types of criteria: combat effectiveness, utility and out of combat effectiveness, versatility and multi-classing potential, gear dependency, and last but not least, the fun factor. All of these are pretty self-explanatory, but again, they are going to be rated on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 meaning that combat effectiveness, the class is utterly useless in combat. It does not provide any sort of offensive capabilities, which none of the classes do have that, but we have to just have that as part of the scale as the lowest denomination. And then 10 being that the class is downright broken or god tier in terms of its offensive capabilities in battle. So maybe a class that's able to deal a ton of Nova damage or has extremely good control options would be considered a 10 out of 10 for combat effectiveness, or even has an exploit that will break the game because you just one-shot a boss or deal 1,000,000 damage. Now, based upon the scores, they can have a 10 out of 10 for each of these 5 categories, so they can have a maximum score of 50 out of 50 if a class is rated 40 points or higher. That's going to be S plus tier. If it is between 35 and 39 points, it is S tier. If it is within 30 to 34 points, it's an A tier. And if it is within 25 and 29 points, it's going to be rated B tier. So you can see over here, I already have a rank showing that has a little formula that replicates exactly what I just said. At the moment, everything has 0 here because it's going to get summed up, and then it will automatically calculate the ranking on the right side. So that's pretty much my mindset going into this tier list. We're going to be rating things on all aspects of how you might play them and how you might want to use them. And the point of that is so that you get a good idea whether or not you're going to actually like this class. Maybe you want to play a character that's not well-rounded. Maybe you just want to play a character that's super good, that has very high combat effectiveness. Well, then if you see that they have a very high combat effectiveness score, you're going to be more inclined to try that out. And we are going to be providing a build for each one of the classes just to get you started, just to give you some inspiration. So let's dive into the tier list. All right, so starting off with number 1, we have the Barbarian class. Barbarians use their martial prowess and primal rage to strengthen themselves and dominate in combat. They have 4 subclasses: the Berserker Barbarian, the Giant Barbarian, Wild Magic, and Wild Heart Barbarian. Wild Heart is basically the equivalent to Totem Barbarian. Now, for the class progression, rage is the primary feature for barbarians. This is your key thing that makes barbarians able to manifest their anger. You basically, as a bonus action, can get resistance to physical damage, which is awesome. You can deal extra melee damage, depending on your level, for melee and thrown weapon attacks that scale with strength. And then you also have advantage on strength checks and strength saving throws. So this ability by itself is the entire identity for the Barbarian, and is what makes you such a good damage dealer as well as a frontline tank for your party. Now we also have unarmored defense so that we can add our dex and con mod to our AC if we're not wearing armor. We can have reckless attack at level 2, which is going to give us advantage on attack rolls in exchange for enemies having advantage on attack rolls against us. And then later on we're going to get extra attack, fast movement. We'll have feral instinct for a bonus to initiative, brutal critical for extra damage on crit, and relentless rage to make us harder to kill. If we go over to our spreadsheet here and look at the first category, we are going to be rating Barbarian for combat effectiveness, and in my opinion, I think they are a solid 9 out of 10. The reason why is because Barbarian, specifically Throwzerker, which is Berserker using thrown weapons, and Path of the Giant Barbarian, they can take advantage of thrown weapons. And thrown weapons are really strong in Baldur's Gate 3 compared to D&D because of a particular feat. Tavern Brawler. So Tavern Brawler, whenever you make an unarmed attack, use an improvised weapon, or throw a weapon at somebody, you can add your strength modifier not once but twice to the damage and the attack row. This ability is also a half feat, so you can increase your strength or con by 1, and it's utterly busted. Literally, it was broken at the start of patch 8, because if you play Path of the Giant Barbarian, you could throw your weapon, and Elemental Cleaver, which you get at level 6, adds on bonus damage, which would then proc Tavern Brawler twice from a single attack. So you would get double the benefits out of it, which was literally disgusting. They fixed that. It's patched, so you can't abuse it anymore, but it's still really strong. If you have drank a Cloud Giant potion and you have 24 strength, you're going to be able to add on +7 to the damage row twice and +7 to the attack row twice, not including proficiency bonus. So a total of +14 is pretty insane, because you could do that, at any point when you get a Cloud Giant potion, or even just a Hill Giant potion. Is going to give you a substantial boost to your damage output just from this feat once you take it at level 4, which I highly recommend taking at level 4. So just that alone makes Barbarian very powerful in combat, but even without it, they get rage bonus damage, and they also have reckless attack and brutal critical, so they have a lot of features that are already oriented towards dealing damage, particularly with melee weapons and up front and close and personal, or throwing the weapons at other people. They have a lot of potential for combat, and we're gonna have them at a 9 out of 10. I think that's pretty fair. Now, out of combat effectiveness, that's a different story. They don't bring a lot to the table outside of combat. Typically, you play Barbarian, you're going to have high strength. You might have like 14 dex, maybe 16 dex. You're going to have high con. Typically, your skills are not going to be of very much use to the party. There's usually going to be somebody else who's better at you for most of the skills, other than athletics. You have very good athletics. If you can't lockpick a door, chances are you can just break open a door or a chest with your fist, especially if you're using Tavern Brawler. So there's always that. But also, I would say that out of combat, one of the cool things about Barbarian is that they have a lot of dialogue options. So this here is a list of Barbarian dialogue options, and look how many freaking options there are for intimidation. There is a million options for intimidation, a few per persuasion and performance, but a lot of these are very low DC compared to what they should be if you tried a regular persuasion option. So just that alone kind of makes the Barbarian a little bit of useful outside of combat. And you do get Thaumaturgy if you play the Tiefling or if you go Path of Giant Barbarian, so you could have that synergy as well. I'm going to give them a 3 out of 10. They're not entirely useless. They do have some potential, but again, it's not great compared to the other classes. So when it comes to the versatility and the multi-classing potential for Barbarian, there are some reasons to multi-class into Barbarian. You get Rage at level 1 and Reckless Attack at level 2, so you get a lot of value from those first 2 early levels. I've seen Barbarian Fighters, I've seen Barbarian Paladins, I've seen Barbarian Rogues. Being able to get advantage on all your attacks regardless of what's going on is really nice to have, and resistance to physical damage certainly doesn't hurt either. So I think it has good multi-classing potential. Its versatility, primarily you're going to be the damage dealer or the tank or both, and you can either attack from close range or you can attack from far away with thrown weapons and use gravity to your advantage. So I'm going to give them a 6 out of 10. They're actually quite versatile, a lot more than you might think. And when it comes to gear dependency, they're a solid 9. They are not reliant on gear. They're a martial class, so having a good weapon certainly helps a lot, but because of rage, because of all the things I mentioned earlier, like brutal critical and reckless attack, they do not need armor or weapons. They also have unarmored defense, which I also mentioned. They don't need to have a whole lot of gear to be useful, not as much as the other classes. Oftentimes you can prioritize, your fighter getting all the good gear over your barbarian, and the barbarian's still going to do great. So we're going to rate them a 9 for gear. And then fun factor, we're going to give them a solid 10 out of 10. To me, barbarians, if you want to play a martial character, they are going to be one of the most fun martials to play because of just how you can really roleplay into you're a crazy freaking barbarian. Maybe you're just getting drunk, getting hammered, smashing heads in, just having a blast, wrecking house, being the oh yeah Kool-Aid man, breaking through walls. There's a lot of cool barbarian things that you can do in this game that I haven't seen in any other type of CRPG or TTRPG, and I love that. I love that so much. So for those reasons, our score for Barbarian is 37 out of 50, and that's going to put us at S rank, easy S rank for Barbarian. Now, if you guys don't believe that Barbarian is S rank, the build that I'm going to recommend, this is from Morgana Evelyn. I'll leave, again, a link in the description below for her Frost Giant Barbarian build, which is absolutely a menace that she brings into Honor Mode and decimates it with. Frost Giant Barbarian, holy cow, is it it's insane. You freeze your enemies, and once they are frozen, they are vulnerable to bludgeoning damage, which means you can Spartan front kick them in the face, and you will deal double damage on all of your kicking attacks. And of course, since we're taking Tavern Brawler, we're dealing extra strength damage on our kicking attacks. So we're able to just break people's faces with our feet. Pretty hilarious. Check that out. It's so much fun. I highly recommend trying it if you are interested in playing a barbarian character. And let's move on over to our next class. All right, so next up we have is the Bard class. Bards are expert storytellers, artists, and performers. They're able to channel their power through song, speech, and even performance to cast spells, which makes sense because their primary spellcasting stat is charisma. There is 4 subclasses for Bards: the College of Glamour, College of Lore, College of Swords, and the College of Valor, which actually give quite a bit of variation between playstyles. And the primary ability for the Bard is going to be Bardic Inspiration. So this is a resource that you can expend to give a Bardic Inspiration die to your fellow allies, which they can then roll on an attack roll, an ability check, or a saving throw once until the next rest. And then once they use it, it's consumed until you give them another one. But you can also use Bardic Inspirations for all of your subclass features. So for example, the College of Swords is going to have maneuvers, Bardic maneuvers, such as the Defensive Flourish, Slashing Flourish, and the Mobile Flourish, that you can expend a Bardic Inspiration, and then you can do a unique type of attack. For example, the Slashing Flourish is going to allow us to make 2 ranged attacks or a sweeping melee attack, which I think is really cool and very unique. And then something like the College of Glamour could expend Bardic Inspiration, and then you can use your Mantle of Inspiration to give THP and allow your party to reposition, which is really, really helpful. So Bard is primarily a support class, but we're gonna break it down and get into it. It's good for a lot of different things. And their later features, they have Song of Rest, so basically the party gets 3 rests per day instead of 2. It's actually super good. They have Jack of All Trades, where they can add half their proficiency bonus to ability checks they are not proficient in. They get Skill Expertise at level 3. They have Font of Inspiration to restore their Bardic Inspirations on a short rest rather than a long rest at level 5. That's super big. Counter Charm, Magical Secrets. We're going to talk about these later on. Let's go straight over to the categories. For combat effectiveness, Bard is going to be at a 6. They are actually quite effective in combat, but especially at low level, you're kind of stuck just using Vicious Mockery or having to use a ranged weapon, which compared to something like a fighter that has the archery fighting style, you're typically not going to be nearly as effective. And so the Bard really doesn't have a lot of strong offensive options early on, not until 3rd level when they get Hypnotic Pattern or Fear or like really powerful control spells. And later on, they do start to pick up, and they can be very powerful, especially if you play a Swords Bard with the Ring of the Mystic Scoundrel. You are able to make an attack twice, and then you can make one of them a slashing range floor so that you attack 2 enemies. So you're basically making 3 range attacks, and then as a bonus action, you can cast an enchantment or an illusion spell that has a casting time of an action. So that's super high value. It's very powerful. But overall, most of the time, you're not really dealing a whole lot of damage with Bard, and you're not able to get powerful control options until later. So putting them at a 6. For out of combat utility, Bard gets a straight up 10 out of 10. Not only do they have skill expertise, so they're going to be very good at particular skills, they are typically dexterity and charisma based. So you can take that expertise in sleight of hand, you can take that expertise into persuasion, into intimidation, into deception, really whatever you want. They also have bardic inspiration to give to other people, so that your skill monkey, if you have one in the party besides yourself, they're going to have a much higher chance of passing that very important skill check or that very important saving throw. Bardic dice are so fucking helpful outside of combat. I cannot overstate their usefulness. Additionally, we have access to spells like Enhance Ability, and we have Magical Secrets, so we can take other spells that can help us outside of combat if we need that. So they really have a lot of value, max value, I'd say, as far as a class with good out of combat potential. Now let's talk about versatility and multi-classing potential. Bard, I mean, if you can't tell, they have very high versatility. They can play a variety of different roles. If you want to be a melee bard, more of a Gish or like a Spellblade, you can play Swords Bard. If you want to be pure support, you can play College of Glamour Bard. If you want to be a spellcaster that has that skeleton key where you have the right spell to fill in the niche for your party, you can play a lore bard. They're going to get access to magical secrets at level 6, but all bards in general get access to magical secrets at level 10. And what magical secrets is basically access to 2 different spells from any spell list, any class's spell list. So here's the list of spells that you can take from Magical Secrets. We have some really powerful options that, again, you're not going to normally have access to unless you are that specific class. But because we have Magical Secrets from Bard, we can take spells such as Counterspell, we can take Banishment, we can take Banishing Smite, we can even take Spirit Guardians. These are going to be some high value spells that are typically unique to only a single or only a few types of classes that you wouldn't have access to, that are going to be really powerful in battle. And for those reasons, we're going to give Bard a 9 for versatility. When it comes to multi-classing, Swords Bard is a fantastic dip for a lot of classes. I will say typically you want to stay in Bard just so that you get more Bardic die, because it depends on what level you are, how much Bardic die you're going to have, and how high that die is. But there is some potential for multi-classing, and just the overall versatility of Bard, being able to play multiple different types of roles, gives it a 9 out of 10. Now, when it comes to gear, we're going to give it a 4 out of 10, and the reason for that is because Bard is very dependent on gear for survivability. Without mage armor and without shield, which, again, unless you're going to take that with Magical Secrets, you're not going to have access to these spells, or you multi-class, you have very, very low AC. You're gonna try to prioritize getting good light armor or taking the moderately armored feat and then getting good medium armor and a shield so that you can bolster your AC in battle. Otherwise, you're gonna have to just play very safe, very far away from the fight so that you don't get targeted, because again, the AC for Bard is very, very low. Now, last but not least, we have our fun score, and I think Bard deserves a solid 9 out of 10. Bard is a lot of fun to play, particularly because you have capabilities to use instruments. And so with the instrument proficiency, you can go ahead and play a song for your friends. You can play the sad violin if your friend's about to die, or you can play epic war music, a mist battle, and just the options you get, especially a lot of cool Bard dialogue options you can interact with and help out some of the other bards such as Alfira. And that presents good opportunities for roleplay. It presents good variety, especially for the gameplay as a bard, because you have access to all sorts of different skills and abilities, both in and out of combat. So, in my opinion, bards are very fun. We're gonna give them a 9 out of 10, and our total score is 38, putting them in S rank, just a little bit above Barbarian. Now, if you guys need a Bard build, I recommend Cephalopocalypse's Bard for the College of Lore Bard build. It's going to be pretty comprehensive, covering all of the features and abilities of it, and also good recommendations on what you might want to use. Of course, I also do have a Barded tank build, which is very different because, again, it's multi-class. It's more of a Paladin than a Bard, but there is the option of that if you want to have a character that takes a dip in Bard and does make use of some Bard things. Alright, so next up is going to be Cleric. Clerics worship and enact their deity's will to the world for better or for worse. They are able to channel the power of faith to cast spells, and of course, wisdom is their primary spellcasting ability. The Cleric's main feature is going to be Channel Divinity, which they get at level 2, and they have access to the Turn Undead Channel Divinity, which is super strong against Undead, but also they're going to have a unique Channel Divinity depending on their subclass. There is a total of 8 subclasses: Death, Knowledge, Life, Light, Nature, Tempest, Trickery, and War. Quite a lot of subclasses. I think Wizard is the only other class that is going to have this many subclasses for your character. And each one, the fun part is that, you know, each one is going to represent a different domain or a different deity and god, but also their channel divinities have a variety of different effects. So for the Tempest Cleric, you're going to have access to Destructive Wrath, where you'll deal max damage on thunder or lightning. And then if you have the Life Domain Cleric, you're going to have Preserve Life, where you can give really strong AoE healing to the party. So really, Cleric is going to be a versatile class because there's so many different subclasses that are able to do particular and unique things using Channel Divinity or using other subclass features. And then of course later on we're going to get access to Destroy Undead, which is like an upgraded version of our Turn Undead, and Divine Intervention, which is a one-time free action that will allow you to heal somebody back to full health or deal a ton of radiant damage in a burst. This is only once per adventure, so honestly it's not really that good, but it's not bad. You can use it to summon, to create a very powerful weapon for your character. So it's got some uses, but you know, overall I'd say the power of the Cleric is in the subclass as well as the spell list. And so let's go over the ranking criteria. So starting off with combat effectiveness, Cleric is going to be sitting at a solid 8 out of 10 for me, primarily because Cleric has really good damage cantrips. Now that patch 8 has given us Toll the Dead, you are able to deal 1d12 necrotic damage at level 1 to an enemy that has already been injured if they fail a wisdom saving throw. Wisdom saving throws, especially early game, are typically really bad for your enemies, so it is a good damage option. In Act 2, Toll the Dead is way less useful, but you know, if you take Sacred Flame, you can still use Sacred Flame for that. And of course, at mid-game and higher levels, we have access to Spirit Guardians, which is one of the best AoE damage dealing spells. You're going to run around and you're just going to burn your enemies into nothingness with Spirit Guardians. It is a really strong and fun spell to use for damage. They also have, you know, Guiding Bolt and Inflict Wounds as some early damage dealing spells, and then later on they get Guardian of Faith. They get things like Banishment, Command, and Bless, powerful buffs and control spells that are going to make them very effective in battle. Outside of battle, they are a wisdom-based character, so they're good at finding you buried treasure, you know, perception, survival, insight, those sorts of skills. They're going to give you good value. They have guidance, and they also have enhanceability. So I think they're a pretty solid 6 out of 10. We could even put them at a 7 out of 10. I think that's totally fair. They don't have really high skills because, you know, they don't have expertise, they don't have dex typically, but I think they give you quite a good amount of value outside of combat. Now, for versatility, Cleric is really high. I'm actually going to rate Cleric at a 9 for versatility because you can play Clerics as a damage dealer, you can play Clerics as a tank, you can play Clerics as a support, you can do a light domain Cleric that has the radiating aura debuff that's going to be dealing AoE damage on top of debuffing enemies. So it's like you can do a mixture of multiple types of play styles in a single build, and Cleric has a lot of potential for multi-classing just because you get your subclass at level 1. You can dip Tempest Cleric with Sorcerer, Storm Sorcerer, to just blow people the fuck up with lightning spells that you're dealing max damage on. You can dip into Life Cleric if you want to play a heal bot. You can dip into Light Domain Cleric if you want to have a nice radiant damage AoE. Good potential there. For gear, they are relatively gear dependent. They do at least have medium armor proficiency and shields by default, so they're going to be a lot tankier than most other spellcasters out of the box. That's really great. That makes them a little bit less needy in terms of needing gear for survivability, but gear certainly does help out quite a lot, especially for boosting your spell save DC, which is really important as a cleric. Now, fun factor, at least for me, I'm going to be a bit strict here. We're going to give them a 6 out of 10 for fun factor, mainly because I played a lot of clerics before in D&D and in Baldur's Gate 3, and most of the time, you're kind of just casting Sacred Flame and ending your turn, you know? In combat, you're trying to conserve your resources, which does apply to most of the other classes, but for whatever reason, Sacred Flame and Toll the Dead, they just feel mundane when you're spamming them constantly back and forth and not really doing a whole lot else. You know, early game, your highest value spell is going to be Bless. You just cast Bless and then Sacred Flame for the rest of the combat. Unfortunately, it is going to be very linear to play clerics. They are prepared spellcasters, so you do have some good options for your spells, but sometimes it feels like, you know, the types of things that you can do with your spells are a little bit constrained. And for those reasons, I'm going to put Cleric at a 6 out of 10 for the fun factor. For some people, you might enjoy Cleric a lot more, but maybe I've just played way too much of Shadowheart. Maybe I've just played in a campaign where every single player was a Cleric, but for me, their fun is going to be a little bit lower value than the other classes. Now, if you guys need a build for Cleric, I do have a fantastic light domain build. It's going to be really strong, both as a support character, but also as an AoE damage dealer. So you're just going to feel like a boss because you'll walk into a room, nuke the battlefield, and then on top of nuking the battlefield, you're going to blind everybody with radiating orbs. They're going to be debuffed heavily so that they're going to miss all their attacks, and you can just kind of stand in the middle of the crowd with Spirit Guardians up and obliterate your foes, which is hilarious. So check that out if you're interested in playing Cleric. Let's move on over to Druid. Alright, so next up we have is Druid. Druids are closely attuned with nature and the animals that live in it. They are able to utilize the power of nature to cast spells, and as such have the ability to transform into various creatures. Druids use wisdom as their primary spellcasting stat. There's 4 subclasses for Druids. We got Circle of the Land, which is more of a spellcaster, Circle of the Moon, focused on wild shaping, Circle of Spores, focused on a little bit of tankiness and damage, and then Circle of Stars, well, actually focused on summoning. Circle of Stars is going to be a much more versatile subclass, which got added by patch 8. Circle of Stars, you can go into Starry form, where basically you can take the Archer form to do a bonus action ranged attack. You can do the Dragon form to have a bonus action breath attack, as well as you can't roll lower than 9 or 10 on concentration checks, or concentration saving throws, which is super good. And then last is the Chalice form, which is going to give you bonus healing. So a lot of versatility from that. Their main feature for Druid is going to be Wild Shape. At level 2, you get access to Wild Shape, where you can, as a bonus action, if you're Circle of the Moon, or as a main action, you can transform into an animal depending on your level. So you get different types of Wild Shape forms, and you get more options as you level up. And if you go into Moon Druid, you get even more options, unique options to that subclass. So wild shape really is the primary thing of what makes a druid a druid. It's really good, and it actually gives us a lot of things that we can do both in combat and outside of combat. So let's cover the tier list. The combat effectiveness category for the druid we're going to put at a 7. It is actually quite solid. Even though druids don't have very high damage cantrips, they get shillelagh as well as thorn whip as kind of their main damage cantrips, where you're either bonking people with a quarterstaff that scales with wisdom, or you're using your thorn whip to pull enemies off from high ground or out of good positions or cover. So unfortunately, they don't have good damage options early game. Second level, Moonbeam is quite strong, but you know, most of their spells are focused on either buffing or on some sort of minor crowd control rather than hard CC. So things like plant growth and spike growth, they're going to deal damage, they're going to slow enemies down, but it's not hard CC like a hypnotic pattern that's going to straight up eliminate people from the fight for a couple turns, or at least until they take damage. Druid, now if you played now if you have heard about the Owlbear wild shape, which I will bring up right now, basically at level 6 you get access to turning into an owlbear, where you can then make claw attacks and a crushing flight attack that will scale damage based upon the distance that you jump off from and whether or not you have been increased in size by like spells like a large or a potion of growth. Crushing flight is absolutely busted. I don't even think it's like sleeper at this point. I'm pretty sure most people know how busted owlbear form is for the druid. I could rate them higher. You know, if it was specifically Circle the Moon Druid, I would give them a 10 out of 10 for combat effectiveness. But if we kind of factor their overall combat effectiveness, if you're not doing the owlbear form and abusing Crushing Flight, then they're really just going to be like a 7 out of 10 for combat effectiveness. They're not super crazy, but they are good damage dealers. All right, out of combat, they are going to be a 7 out of 10. Pretty much the same as Cleric. The only difference is that we are able to wild shape, and we can use our wild shape to turn into smaller creatures that we can then get into nooks and crannies. You can use your wild shape to turn into a cat and then go into a burrow hole that gives you access to Maul's little hideout, or to a certain vault where there's treasure. There are a lot of good options that you can get exploring around using your wild shape that I think is definitely underrated. And so for those reasons, everything else is pretty much the same as Cleric. For those reasons, I think it's a 7 out of 10. Actually, we'll give it an 8 out of 10 because, again, Cleric does not have access to wild shape to explore things. So versatility, they are pretty damn versatile. Give them another 8 out of 10 because they can play the role of a tank and a damage dealer, a frontline damage dealer, if you play Circle the Moon, if you wild shape and you jump into the battle as a bear or an owl bear or a myrmidon, an elemental. You're going to be pretty tanky, especially compared to most other spellcasters. So there's that. But then you can also play a support, a controlling character, a healing character. There is good versatility for the druid. When it comes to multi-classing, typically you're not going to multi-class into or out of druid. You want to get access to those higher level spells, and you want to get access to those better wild shape forms. So multi-classing potential is rather limited, but I will say with patch 8, they do have a lot more potential due to the nature of starry form of Circle of Stars druid, which is a great multi-class. If you want to play a heal bot, you know, Circle of Stars Chalice form is fantastic, and I do believe for my light cleric domain build, we multi-class into Circle of Stars for the Dragon Breath weapon attack, which is a great consistent way to weaponize your bonus action. I think multi-classing for druid is at least an option that's available on the table. Now, going into gear, straight up a 10 out of 10. Druids need no gear. You can rely upon your wild shape, especially if you're Circle of the Moon, to the point where you literally don't need magic items because you just don't even benefit from them while you're wild shaped. And you know, I played games where the druid just gets literally no items, and they're still extremely valuable to the party, even on honorable difficulty. So 10 out of 10 for druids in terms of not needing any sort of gear. So when it comes to fun score, I'm going to give Druid an 8 out of 10. They are very solid in terms of how much fun I've had playing them. They really put a lot of emphasis into the wild shape, and they gave all the wild shapes unique abilities. turning into the wolf, turning into the spider, being able to web enemies, being able to expose weakness. There is some really good options for your wild shape that are a heck of a lot of fun to play throughout the entire playthrough, not just at low level. And so I think that gives a lot more value to the fun aspect of playing a druid character. You know, you're still a full spellcaster. You have access to tons of spells. Oh, and also Thorn Whip can be used to fish bodies out of lava, which I think is just hilarious and surprisingly pretty damn good. So just for those reasons, we're gonna give it an 8 out of 10. The score is a 41. It is actually the highest score we've had so far, and that is going to put us into S+ tier for the druid. I genuinely think druid is a little bit undervalued. I don't think people don't know how powerful it is, but people just tend to not play it because maybe wild shape is a little bit of a confusing option, especially if you're a newer player. But I highly recommend it. In fact, I would say if you're playing on an honor mode run, having a druid is going to be incredibly high value to your party. They're able to get their wild shape backs on short rest, so even if they run out of spell slots, they're still able to use wild shapes pretty frequently, and those wild shapes are going to be good value. So check out druid, try it out. So if you guys need a build for druid, I'm going to leave a link to Garson's channel. His Kaiju Barbarian Druid multi-class is just so much fun, turning into a big ass owlbear, then using your giant's might to enhance your size so you're even more massive, and then leaping off into your enemies and smashing them into bloody puddles. I mean, that's going to be a ton of fun, and I dare you to tell me that's not S+ class, because you could use this for a variety of different applications. But nothing is more funny than reloading your owlbear with telekinesis and launching them into the enemy like a catapult and exploding them. Alright, so next up is going to be Fighter. Fighters use their martial expertise to fight enemies and support their allies in combat. Typically, they're going to use strength for melee weapons and dexterity for ranged weapons, but you could use strength for ranged weapons if you're using a Titan Strength bow, and you could use dexterity for melee weapons if you want to use something like a rapier or you want to dual wield finesse weapons. Now, their subclasses are Arcane Archer, Battlemaster Champion, and Eldritch Knight Fighter. All of these give them a good variety of options. If you want it to be an archer, then of course Arcane Archer is going to be your go-to. Battlemaster, you could use it for both melee and ranged characters. Champion, same thing. Eldritch Knight means we're going to have a little bit of spellcasting on the side, which is quite nice. Now, their key feature is going to be Action Surge. And if you don't know what Action Surge is, you basically get a free second action that you can immediately use. So this is particularly useful because if you're playing on honor mode difficulty, they're a lot more strict about action economy, and so things like haste and Terrazul, which would normally give you another action, and then if you had extra attack, for example, if you're playing on tactician mode, not honor mode, and you have extra attack as a level 5 fighter, if you pop haste on yourself, then you can make 2 attacks and then use your hasted action for 2 more attacks. But if you're playing on honor mode, you only get to make 1 attack with that hasted action, regardless of your extra attack. Now, Action Surge gets around that for honor mode. So with Action Surge, you can make 2 attacks, Action Surge, and then make 2 more attacks for a total of 4. And at level 11, they get improved extra attack. They are the only class that gets improved extra attack. So they get to make 3 attacks per turn, and with Action Surge, they can make 6 attacks in a singular turn, not including if they were hasted or with Terrazul, where they could make a total of 8 attacks if they really wanted to, which is absolutely insane. Fighters are going to be the characters that have some of the most and highest potential for burst damage and for taking out key targets at the beginning of a fight. Obviously, Paladin also has a lot of Nova potential as well with smites, but we'll talk about that later. So let's get into the actual tier list part itself. We have combat effectiveness. I've already put it in, but Fighter is going to have a 10 out of 10 because Action Surge really is one of these unique things that you cannot replicate. Even if you get the Gloves of Martial Prowess or whatever it's called that gives you a little mini Action Surge, if you're playing on honor mode, that's only going to give you 1 more attack. All of these things that give you extra actions in the game, they're only going to give you 1 more attack if you're playing on honor mode. So Action Surge from the fighter class is something that's very uniquely powerful, especially on a character that can make many attacks in a single turn. Now, additionally, fighters, they get a lot of feats, and so they're very well rounded. You can really play a fighter to be adaptable as a high damage ranged fighter, or a high damage melee fighter, or even if you want to just be a straight up tank, you can kit your character out to have sentinel, to have tough, to be a very difficult to kill character. So there's a lot of good options with fighter that make them really peak in terms of their combat effectiveness in battle. They're made for fighting, as the name implies. Now, out of combat effectiveness, oof, not nearly as good. We're going to give them a 5 out of 10. The reason why they're higher than Barbarian is because fighters can go dexterity. And so oftentimes if you're playing fighter, if you're an arcane archer, you're going to have high intelligence, high dexterity. So you're going to be able to give some useful skills to the party for sleight of hand or for investigation or arcana. But normally, you know, if you're just a strength-based fighter, you are not going to be doing a whole lot besides athletics checks. So overall, fighter, if you want, it can actually be decent in some skills, but you're not going to have expertise. You're not going to have spells that help you out, like guidance and enhance ability. So they're a 5 out of 10. Versatility, they are going to be, I would say, an 8 out of 10, maybe even a 9 out of 10. We're going to leave them in an 8 out of 10. Fighters, you can play them as spellblades. You can play them as pure melee, two-handed, sword and board, range, pure range. You can play them as the tank. It's really up to you how you want to adapt your fighter for the needs of the party or for your own preferences. They can't be full spellcasters because obviously they're martial characters, but if you want to take a dip into fighter to get that action surge so that you can cast another spell in battle, honestly, it's not that bad. And getting proficiency in constitution saving throws, as well as access to heavy armor from taking that first level in fighter, is very high value. So multi-classing wise, going into fighter for a fighting style or for action surge is very, very strong, and it is actually used in quite a few builds. So they're going to have a pretty high score for versatility. For gear, they are very much dependent on gear. We're going to give them probably a 6 out of 10. Actually, no, we're going to give them a 5 out of 10 because a fighter is only worth as much as their weapon is. If you are playing a character that's a great weapon master, you do get that big bonus to attack. You can power attack where you have a -5 to your attack roll in exchange for +10 damage on your attacks. But if you don't have a good melee weapon, you're either going to be missing a lot, or even when you hit, you're not dealing as much damage as you could be as if you were to have a very powerful weapon. And so your equipment is almost everything as a fighter. So they're going to have a pretty low score. And then fun factor, fighters they're decently fun. They don't have a lot of really cool flavor and unique dialogue that I think is either really entertaining or very unique compared to the other classes, but they are a solid 7 out of 10 for fun factor. If you like making a shit ton of attacks in one turn and killing things, then they're going to be a much higher fun factor for you. But they have a score of 35, which still puts them at the tippity toe of S rank. If you guys want to check out a fighter build, I have the Arcane Archer God Archery build that is available on my page. You can check that out in the link below. And basically, if you want to play a character who uses the Helmet of Arcane Acuity to have this insanely high DC on their magical arrows, you're going to be able to just CC the crap out of your enemies and then rip them to pieces with just insane damage output over the course of many turns, or even action surging for a big burst of damage. It's a lot of fun. Check that out. Alright, so next up is Le Monke, the Monk. Monks are unarmed combatants capable of spending key points, which is a resource for them to perform special abilities. Their key ability scores are Wisdom, Dex, and Con, and their main thing is punching people. So level 1, you get martial arts. Whenever you attack with a monk weapon, such as a quarterstaff, or you make an unarmed attack, then you can spend a bonus action to make another unarmed strike. And that damage from your unarmed attack is going to scale with your martial arts die, so it's going to be 1d4 plus your strength or your dexterity at level 1, and then at level 3 it's a 1d6, at level 9 it is a 1d8. You also get unarmored defense, so you can add your wisdom in addition to your dexterity to your AC whenever you're not wearing armor. So that makes them a little bit more tanky. And they also have a resource called Key that increases with level, and they can spend that on unique abilities. So at level 1, you get Flurry of Blows. You can spend a bonus action, and you can make 2 unarmed attacks. At level 2, you get Patient Defense and Step of the Wind. Patient Defense is going to give you basically the dodge action where attacks against you have disadvantage and you have advantage on dex saves as a bonus action if you spend a key point, and Step of the Wind is going to allow you to dash and disengage as a bonus action if you spend a key point. So those are some pretty awesome things. The main thing that Monk is known for, though, in addition to everything else, is going to be Stunning Strike. So at level 5, you get Stunning Strike where you can spend a key point, and when you hit an enemy, you have the chance to stun them. If they fail a Constitution saving throw against you, which is going to scale with Wisdom, the DC for that, then they will be stunned until the start of your next, or actually until the end of your next turn, I believe, which is absolutely wild. This is super strong, this ability. Being able to just remove enemies from the fight by stunning them is almost as powerful as killing them in many cases, a lot of the times, especially if it's an enemy that's going to cast a big spell that's going to disable your own party. You want to knock them out first with Stunning Strike. So super good ability. There are 4 classes for the monk. We got Way of the Drunken Master, we have Way of 4 Elements, Way of Open Hand, and Way of Shadow. Let's get straight into our categories here, starting with combat effectiveness. Monk is a 10. They are some really solid damage dealers, and despite not using weapons most of the time, they have a lot of good equipment in Baldur's Gate 3 that are going to let them output a significant amount of damage, as much or even more damage than some weapon users, which is hilarious. And of course, they're going to be busted because of Tavern Brawlers. So whenever they make an unarmed attack, you can add your strength mod twice to the damage and the attack row. So going to Strength Monk or just drinking a potion of Hill Giant Strength or Cloud Giant Strength as a Tavern Brawler monk is pretty busted. You do crazy damage. And of course, we also have one of the strongest subclasses in the game, the Way of the Open Hand, which basically has a way at level 6 to gain additional damage on unarmed strikes, and also a way to gain a second bonus action so that you can use Flurry of Blows twice in a single turn. You can make 6 attacks without having to use an action surge or being hasted, which is pretty nuts. It's pretty strong. So monks are definitely really good at outputting damage, primarily in close range, in melee, up front, close and personal. They don't have great tools for survival, but they do have a lot of mobility, so they're more of a skirmisher than a bruiser or a brawler. Now, out of combat, monks are dex and wisdom based characters, so they actually have decent out of combat utility. I mean, I would probably say it's about a 5. It's about the same as the fighter. It's a little bit higher because perception is very valuable for spotting treasure, and dexterity is always good to have, but they don't really have any skills that help them out outside of combat for skill checks and other things like that. Now, versatility. Monk is very difficult to multiclass. Unfortunately, due to the fact that you get key points as you level up, you really want to keep your levels in Monk to get as much key as possible to do all your stunning strikes, to do your flurry of blows. So wouldn't really recommend multiclassing with it, and also you can't really play other roles to monk. You're mainly going to be the melee damage dealer. So for those reasons, we're going to give them a 3 out of 10 for versatility. They are unfortunately not very versatile. However, for gear, they were 9 out of 10. They do need good gloves or something to boost their unarmed strike damage, but other than that, monks don't really need that much gear. They can function quite well without it. They have decent AC due to the fact they have unarmored defense, and also they have good mobility as well. So typically you don't need to outfit them as much as something like a fighter or a bard. Fun factor, monks are very fun. We're going to give them an 8 for fun factor because being that monk, just using nothing but your bare hands to brutalize your opponents is hilarious. And there are some pretty cool monk things that you can do, specifically with Way of the Drunken Monk. I think that has a lot of interesting flavor despite not being a great subclass. And the Way of the 4 Elements Monk, just super cool avatar airbending kind of things you can do with monk. They are really good in Baldur's Gate 3. I'm so glad that in Baldur's Gate 3 they did a really good job of adjusting the monk ever so slightly so that they are on par with all the other classes. So S tier, pretty obvious here. They're going to be great to have. Now, despite what I just said about the multi-classing for monk, Thief Rogue is a great dip for Monk, and there is a fantastic build from Morgana Evelyn again that is going to be using the Way of the Open Hand alongside Thief Rogue Monk to just deal insane amounts of damage in unarmed combat, and really want you to check that out. If you want a damage dealer class, this is definitely the way to go. I played a lot of Monks, so I don't really need that anymore in my playthroughs, but if you want it, if you never tried it before, I actually recommend trying it out because it's crazy. The amount of damage that you can output with just your fists is mind-blowing with this build, so check that out. Next up we have is the Paladin, our holy warrior of justice type of character. Paladins, they are masters of a variety of weapons and armor. They channel the power of their sacred oath to heal the sick and injured, while also being able to smite their foes. And so Paladins are going to typically use strength, charisma, and a little bit of constitution. They could also be dex-based Paladins as well, or just pure charisma Paladins if you want to dip Hexblade or Pact of the Blade. Now, the main feature for Paladin, of course, is Divine Smite. At second level, you gain the ability to convert your spell slots directly into damage on hit. Now, typically, you're going to save Divine Smite for critical hits, but you can just Divine Smite on a regular attack as well. You're going to deal 2d8 radiant damage plus another 1d8 if it is a fiend or undead, and then if you upcast this, if you spend higher level spell slots, you have second and third level spell slots as a Paladin later on, then you're going to deal an additional 1d8 per level that you upcast this at. So max level you can upcast the smite at is going to be 5th level. That's going to give you a total of 6d8 radiant damage on hit. Double that to 12d8 if you crit, which is freaking crazy. It's a lot of burst damage. They also get Aura Protection, which is a major feature for them that they get at level 6, where they get to add their charisma modifier to all saving throws, all of their saving throws. And then if anyone is within 10 feet of the Aura Protection, they are going to also gain the benefits. Or rather, the Aura Protection is a 10-foot radius around you, and if they're inside of that, they're going to gain that additional charisma modifier, your charisma modifier, to their saving throws. So this ability by itself makes the Paladins always have good saves for everything. If you have a +5 to your charisma mod, then you're going to have a +5 to all of your saving throws while Aura Protection is up, and it stays up until you fall unconscious. So it's going to be up for pretty much all of the fight unless you get downed or die. Very strong, super ridiculously good. There's 5 subclasses for the Paladin. Each one is a different type of oath with different types of tenets and values that your Paladin would have if you take on that oath. So we have Oath of Devotion. You're going to devote yourself to a king or to a god, or to justice. Oath of the Ancients, you're going to devote yourself to nature and the natural world. Oath of the Crown, actually that's more so, you're going to devote yourself to a king or a leader, someone who you're sworn to. Oath of Vengeance, you're going to dedicate yourself to justice, to enacting revenge, and making sure that the wrongs are righted. And then Oathbreaker is for Paladins who have failed to comply with the tenets. They did something like killing an innocent and broken their oath, and then they have the option to become an Oathbreaker, which is pretty cool as well. Let's go over to the ranking criteria. So starting with combat effectiveness, Paladin is going to be a solid 10. Maybe I'm a little bit too generous with the 10s here. I have Fighter, Monk, and Paladin at 10, but I think all of them really are the top tier martial damage characters. Paladin, of course, is going to be a 10 out of 10 because of Divine Smite. And so basically we can use abilities like Luck of the Far Realms, where once per day we can crit, and the Surgeon Subjugation Amulet, where if we crit on a humanoid, we can paralyze them for 2 turns to deal insane amounts of burst damage, as we are able to double the damage on our Divine Smite if we're able to crit on it. Typically, I will just save Divine Smite for only when I crit, so that way you don't go through all of your spell slots in the first fight that you do. And it is extremely powerful. They also have the Aura Protection that I mentioned, which makes their saves really high. And they have heavy armor proficiency as well as shields, so their AC can get very high as well. They're super hard to kill, and they deal a ton of damage, making them absolute monsters on the battlefield. And because long rests are really not that hard to get in Baldur's Gate 3, whenever you do a boss fight, you will have all of your spell slots to dump smites. So they're very, very strong in battle. 10 out of 10. Out of combat utility, we're going to give them a 6 out of 10 because Paladins at least have charisma. So they can be used for persuasion, intimidation, performance, deception, They have out of combat uses as the party's face if there's no one else to be that. Mostly, however, they don't have any other skills or any other spells that are going to really help them outside of combat. So it's mainly the fact that they are charisma based that I'm going to give them a 6 out of 10. They are definitely going to be useful in a lot of social encounters, and in Act 2 you could straight up, you know, persuade some of the Thorn bosses so that you don't have to fight them, but they are going to be really strong if you do decide to fight them. And then versatility and multi-classing. Paladin is a great dip because at second level you get Divine Smite. You can multi-class Paladin with full spellcasters to get access to higher level spell slots for higher level smites and more damage. It is very strong with Warlock. It is very strong with Sorcerer. It's very strong with Bard. All of these spellcasting classes, they scale with Charisma, which Paladin scales very well with. And so there's a lot of good opportunity for multi-classing. You can also play a Paladin as either a tank, a frontline damage dealer, or also, if you really want, they can be a little bit more of a supportive character where they're staying in the back, they're giving their orb protection to the squishy back line. Maybe they're using some range cantrips. You take a dip in Warlock, you use Eldritch Blast, and that'll scale with your charisma, or maybe you do something else. But they do have surprisingly really good flexibility as well. So for those reasons, we're giving them an 8 out of 10. And then for gear, Paladins are fairly dependent on gear. They need a good weapon to deal good damage, but they do a Divine Smite in case they don't have a good weapon, so not as dependent as something like a fighter. We're going to give them a 6 out of 10. One factor for Paladins, I think, because of the way they implemented the oaths and the fact that you can actually break your oaths, Paladins are a lot of fun to play. We're going to give them an 8 out of 10. You can really roleplay as that kind of holy warrior character, and if you don't stick with it all the way, if you decide to suddenly just murder hobo and kill a random innocent civilian, you will then become an oathbreaker, and you can RP that entirely different if you want. You know, there's a good amount of options for the Paladin characters to really fulfill the role of someone who's bringing justice or someone who's been corrupted and is just on the path for blood. So for those reasons, we got 38 points as our score for Paladin. Solid S ranks. We got 6 S ranks and an S plus rank here. Am I being a little bit over generous with the Baldur's Gate 3 classes? Honestly, I don't really think so. I think these classes are just that great that you can play any of these classes and you really are going to be able to excel on honor mode difficulty. But that being said, let's move on over to the next class that I do not think is going to be S rank. That is going to be Ranger. Actually, wait, let's go over builds real fast. If you guys want a build for Paladin, I highly recommend my Unkillable Tank Paladin. It's going to be Oath of the Crown combined with Swords Bard to make a character that has insanely high AC. We pretty much hit the AC cap where we are going to be untouchable to all of our enemies. We are immune to crits. We have like 36 or 37 AC, and we can just straight up smash heads in while being untouchable to attack rolls. And then even if we have to make saves, we have really high saves as well. So that build, solid tank class that is going to show off how effective the Paladin is in combat. Go ahead and check that out. All right, so next up we have is Ranger. These are going to be in tune with nature and their surroundings. Rangers are able to utilize both their knowledge of the wilds and spellcasting to pursue their prey. Their main stats are dexterity, con, and wisdom. And you can play Ranger in a variety of playstyles, primarily just as a melee damage dealer or a range damage dealer. They do have some good subclasses. However, their class progression, if we take a look at this, they actually don't have anything that makes them super unique, like how all the other classes have unique abilities. Things like Divine Smite or Rage or Bardic Inspiration. The Ranger really is a class that's meant to be a little bit more well-rounded, but as a result of that, it doesn't have anything in its base class progression that I would call unique. And so if we look at level 1, we get Favored Enemy and Natural Explorer, which give you one option out of 5 that can allow you to gain proficiencies. It can allow you to gain spells. It can give you kind of unique things, like for example, if you take Bounty Hunter, creatures you hit with Ensnaring Strike will have disadvantage on their saving throw. That's semi-unique because, you know, Rangers only get Ensnaring Strike. Only Rangers get Ensnaring Strike. And then we also have things like the Natural Explorer options where you can get Find Familiar, you can get a Resistance, you can get Sleight of Hand proficiency. So you're going to have some pretty decent utility from level 1, but unfortunately, I wouldn't say this is anything special or unique. Level 2, we get a fighting style, and then we get access to spellcasting. Rangers do have some unique spells. They have Hunter's Mark, Hail of Thorns, and Ensnaring Strike. Now, these spells aren't super ridiculous or crazy. Hunter's Mark is basically the same as Hex. It's slightly worse in the sense that you can't give disadvantage on an ability check. And then Ensnaring Strike, this is actually a pretty good ability to be able to restrain creatures, but your spell save DC is based on Wisdom, and your spell save DC typically isn't going to be very high. So much of the Ranger's identity is purely based on what subclass you play. There's the Beastmaster, the Gloomstalker, the Hunter, and the Swarm Keeper. All of them are pretty damn cool. I would say Hunter is probably the most boring of all the subclass options. Swarm Keeper came from patch 8, and it gives you access to a different type of swarm, jellyfish, moth, bees, that can do unique things. Pretty freaking cool. Is it super strong? Not really, but Beastmaster and Gloomstalker are actually decent subclasses. And so Gloomstalker, you're going to see a lot for damage-based multiclasses, and Beastmaster, shockingly, the bear companion for the Beastmaster, when you get higher level, it's going to have Honey Paws. Your bear can straight up disarm targets, which is very useful, and if they aren't holding weapons, they'll be knocked prone instead. So I actually really like the Beastmaster, and I recommend that one. But let's go over the ranking criteria. So combat effectiveness, as I said, the Ranger doesn't really have anything unique to it. It doesn't have any ways to gain a ton of bonus damage unless you're playing the Gloomstalker, at which point your first turn you're going to get an extra attack from Dread Ambusher, and that extra attack is going to deal a little bit extra damage. That's very, very powerful and nice to have, but other than that, I mean, you're really not going to be dealing more damage than any of the other classes we've mentioned here, maybe besides the Bard. So for those reasons, Ranger is going to have only really a 7 for combat effectiveness. They can be good martial characters. You can just take Sharpshooter with the archery fighting style. You'll deal plenty of damage, but it's not going to be anywhere near the level of the other classes we mentioned. Now, out of combat utility, they are going to have a 6 out of 10. They are going to be dexterity based. They are going to be wisdom based. So they are able to make use of a lot of skills: sleight of hand, stealth, perception, survival. And then they can also gain some proficiencies from their favored foe. So overall, I'd say they're actually not too bad outside of combat, but they're not going to have any spells that are really going to help them out a whole lot outside of combat. So besides like Speak with Animals. So 6 out of 10. Versatility and multi-classing. The Ranger is primarily just going to be used for a damage dealer based character. You at least have the option of melee or range, and then you can play a Beastmaster if you want to have a summon. But you know, when it comes to their actual versatility, I would say they're pretty straightforward, pretty linear. They can't really be used for that many different builds. And when it comes to multiclassing, they can only be used for real like damage based multiclasses. If you want to play the Assassin, Gloomstalker, Battlemaster, and just annihilate your foes in combat, that is certainly on the table, and it's pretty good. But other than that, there's not a whole lot going on for Ranger. You kind of want to get those later class features for the Beastmaster and for the Swarm Keeper, and for those reasons, we're going to give them a 5 for versatility. They're really not that versatile. Gear dependency, they are going to be as gear dependent as all the other classes. We at least have Hunter's Mark for a little bit of bonus damage on hit, so there is that. But you know, I would say, I mean, they still need a good bow, they still need good armor. They don't have those things, they're not going to be doing much because their class in general doesn't really do that much. So I'm going to put them in a 5. They're kind of on that same level on Fighter because they don't even have Action Surge. So they're going to really need a lot, especially late game where the Fighter gets its 3rd attack. Ranger isn't really going to get that much, except from, you know, it depends on what subclass you're playing, and it's not going to be enough to even the playing field unless they have super good gear. Fun factor for Ranger, for me, it's not the most fun class. Well, I'd say flavor-wise, the base class doesn't have much going for it. But, you know, if you play an Animal Companion or a Beastmaster, if you play something like the Swarm Keeper, there is a lot of opportunities for flavor. But I can't remember or recall any meaningful dialogue options as a Ranger. And so kind of for that reason alone, we're going to hit it with a 6 in terms of its fun factor. I'd recommend if you want to play a ranger type character, like using a bow and casting spells, you know, you really are going to be better off playing a swords bard or playing an arcane archer or an eldritch knight archer even. Unfortunately, Ranger just doesn't check all the boxes for me, and compared to the other classes, it is going to be significantly weaker. So its score is going to be a total of 29, which puts it in B. It is probably going to be the only class in B because of how much weaker it is significantly than the other classes, at least in my opinion. If you have any thoughts about that, I would really love to hear it in the comments. If you have a fantastic god tier Ranger build, gosh, would I like to see that. I would love to be proven wrong. So that's going to be Ranger in a nutshell. Now, if you need a build for Ranger, I'm going to recommend Cephalopocalypse's Swarmkeeper Ranger build. The priority for Swarmkeeper, rather than just dealing damage, is going to be on disabling your opponents. So blinding them, charming them, teleporting around, mobility. It is focused on some utility that you don't typically see with damage-based characters like the Ranger and like martial classes. And so I actually think that's pretty high value. It's going to be an interesting video to watch. You can check that out. The link will be in the description below. All right, so next up we have is Rogue. Rogues are going to be well versed in the art of stealth, and they rely on their resourcefulness to be in control of any challenging situation. Their primary stat is dexterity, and if we take a look over to the class progression for Rogues, their main feature is sneak attack. Basically, if you attack an enemy while you have advantage or an ally is within melee range of them, you're going to be able to proc your sneak attack where you get bonus damage on that attack, and that is going to scale with your levels. So level 1, it's a 1d6, but every 2 levels it goes up. So it caps out at 11th level as 6d6 damage, which isn't bad, but it's also not great compared to how powerful your characters scale up in Baldur's Gate 3 once you get into Act 3 because of equipment and gear. 66 damage really is not a whole lot of damage if you think about it in terms of honor mode difficulty in Act 3. Now, they also get expertise, which means they double their proficiency bonus on their skill checks for any skills they have expertise in. They have uncanny dodge to use their reaction to turn whatever attack they're taking into half damage. They have evasion so that if they pass on a dex save, they take no damage, and if they fail, they only take half damage. And then they get reliable talent, where they are able to roll no lower than a 10 on skill checks they're proficient with. So overall, Rogues, even though they aren't going to be the best in combat, especially later on in the game, early on they're actually quite good and consistent, but later on they're going to kind of drop off. They are very good throughout the entire game as skill monkeys, as characters that specialize in particular skills and are always going to be able to ace those skill checks for them. The subclasses for the Rogue are Arcane Trickster, Assassin, Swashbuckler, and Thief. Arcane Trickster, if you want a little bit of a dip in magic. Assassin for really being able to kill people. Swashbuckler for a bit of versatility in both dealing damage and having utility control options in combat. And then Thief for that beautiful extra bonus action that you're going to get. Super, super good to have. Let's talk about the ranking criteria. Now, combat effectiveness for the Rogue, unfortunately, I'm going to rate this a 6 out of 10. It's kind of on that same level of the Bard. They have the opposite problem of the Bard, where the Bard's early game damage is very low, but later on it's going to be much higher. Rogue is very, very, very strong early game, super consistent, does not need items to be good. But as you get better and as you get higher level and as your characters get more equipment, their sneak attack becomes a hell of a lot less useful. And even worse, Rogue is the only martial class that doesn't get extra attack. So they can't take advantage of really powerful weapons like the other classes can because they don't have extra attack to make 2 attacks per turn with. So unfortunately, Rogue, we're only going to give it a 6 in terms of its combat effectiveness. There are some builds that work quite well to be able to take down your enemies in 1 turn, and dipping into Rogue can be really good if you want the Assassin subclass, but overall I would say they are going to be a lot weaker. All right, so for the next category we have our out of combat usability for the Rogue, and that's going to be a 9 out of 10, a solid 9 out of 10. Rogues are very good outside of combat. They have expertise, which means they can double their proficiency on their skills, and then they also have reliable talents. They can't roll lower than a 10 on those skills at high level. Basically, Rogues are always going to be able to succeed on the skill checks that they have expertise in, and so if you have a Rogue that's got expertise in sleight of hand, they're going to always succeed, or at least have a very, very high chance of succeeding, opening up locked doors, locked chests for you, getting you more loot throughout the run. They are extremely reliable when it comes to skill checks, and just on that reason alone, they have that 9 out of 10 for out of combat utility. Now, versatility and multi-classing potential is a different story on the other hand. Thief Rogue and maybe a little bit of Assassin Rogue are the two subclasses that will see multi-class builds in. Thief Rogue in particular is really good with Monk because of the additional bonus action that you get from Thief Rogue. You can basically use that to Flurry of Blows twice. That is super strong. But other than that, there's not a whole lot of reasons to go into Rogue. And even though you do get skill expertise out of Rogue, which is very useful, Rogue unfortunately just is only good at skill monkeys and less so focused on damage based builds. You can play a Rogue as a damage character, but they are going to get outperformed by everybody else if you're pure classing Rogue. So for that reason alone, I think their versatility is relatively low. They are mainly just going to be used for skill checks. We're going to give them a 5 for versatility. Looking at gear, Rogues are going to be less gear reliant than most of the other classes because they have sneak attack, which scales with level. However, that being said, Rogues can be really squishy. They only have their dexterity and light armor to get by, and so unfortunately they will need some gear for survivability, or you're going to have to play them really smart and position them well. Play them as a skirmisher where you're not getting exposed to the front line too often, and then they're going to be able to excel. We'll give them a 6 out of 10 for gear. And then last but not least, we have the fun factor. So for me, Rogues, they are kind of like stealth archers in Skyrim, where they're very powerful in the beginning, but as you get further into the game, they become a little bit more mundane, a little bit more boring, at least in my opinion. There isn't a need for them to do a whole lot of lockpicking in Act 2, or a lot of stealthing around in Act 2. Act 3, they are going to be pretty useful again. There's going to be a lot of general stores and shops that you can sneak into, and you can loot their inventories from the merchants and things like that, and do a lot of rogue things. But overall, I'd say they're probably nowhere more than like a 7 out of 10 for fun factor. So with their score of a 33, Rogue is going to be in A tier. Alright, so if you guys want a build for the Rogue, you can check out Wayfaring Nomad's Swashbuckler build. It's going to be really strong in Act 1 and in Act 2. Might get a little bit outscaled in the late game, but I think it's still fantastic and a good showcase of what you can do with a Rogue build, both in combat and out of combat. So you can definitely check that out if you're interested in trying out the Rogue. All right, so next up we have is the Sorcerer class, which is going to be pretty much my favorite class in general for Dungeons & Dragons, and then also for Baldur's Gate 3. Sorcerers, they can use their innate magical powers to fight enemies and aid allies in combat. They use Charisma as their primary spellcasting stat, and their key feature, if we look at the class progression, is going to be meta magic. And so if you don't know what meta magic is, basically it lets you tweak spells by spending sorcery points, which is your resource, kind of like key points. And with meta magic, you can twist them and contort them into different ways to have different effects. For example, meta magic extended spell will double the duration of conditions, summons, and surfaces caused by the spell. So for example, if you use extended spell on Globe of Invulnerability, you get to double the duration of that spell, which normally is very short. Now it's going to last the entire fight. Freaking absolutely busted. Meta Magic Twin Spell is going to make it so that spells that only target one creature can target two creatures instead. So if you're casting this on a spell like Chromatic Orb, instead of just hitting one enemy, you get to target two enemies with it and effectively double the damage output that turn of the spell. Very, very powerful. Now, at higher level, you get more meta magic options. We get Quicken Spell that turns our action spells into bonus action spells, which is insane. We get Heightened Spell so that they have disadvantage on the saving throw for the save. And we have Subtle Spell so that we can cast the spells without getting counterspelled and while we're silenced, which is really useful as well. So meta magic really is the identity for the Sorcerer, and it's what makes it so powerful because its action economy is enhanced dramatically through the means of meta magic, having spells last longer, making spells a bonus action instead of an action, casting multiple instances of the spells rather than just one is going to make them so much more effective in combat. And the subclasses for the sorcerer are Draconic Bloodline, which is great for the damage sorcerers, Shadow Magic, which is going to be a cool summoner sorcerer, Storm Sorcery, which is a mix of utility, and then Wild Magic for that chaos, that element of chaos. If you really like having a chaotic chaos gremlin type character, then Wild Magic Sorcerers to go to because of Wild Magic Surge, which basically makes random things happen whenever you use your Tides of Chaos and proc your Wild Magic Surge. So looking at Sorcerer, the ranking criteria for combat effectiveness, they're going to be a solid 10 out of 10. If you don't know, my first build that I ever made on YouTube for Baldur's Gate 3 was a Tempest Domain Sorcerer. Was able to use Destructive Wrath alongside Chain Lightning or Chromatic Orb to deal maximum damage and then double damage because the enemy was wet before I threw the lightning spell at them. And that build was insane. We were able to straight up one-shot our enemies and wipe out entire hordes of our foes. So it was incredibly powerful. Sorcerer, because of meta magic, you can main action cast Fireball, quicken spell cast Fireball, and then haste yourself, or drink a potion of haste, or step into a puddle of a potion of haste, and then cast another Fireball. Like, it's absolutely insane. The damage output and the combat effectiveness. Your action economy is just so much better than every other spellcaster because of Quicken Spell, because of meta magic. So you really are the GOAT at spellcasting in combat. We're going to give Sorcerer a 10 out of 10. I think that's pretty clear. Now, out of combat, Sorcerer is going to primarily be good for charisma-based checks. They scale with charisma, and so they're going to be a good face for your party if you don't have a bard, if you don't have a warlock. But other than that, they don't really do that much in terms of out of combat utility. A lot of the times the sorcerers, they have very limited spell selection. They only get one spell that they can learn per level, and so they're going to be mainly taking spells that they're going to get good value out of primarily in combat. And so they're not going to have space for spells that are going to give them utility outside of combat. Maybe they'll take Longstride, or maybe they'll take Jump, but it's very unlikely because they need Mage Armor, they need Shield, they need to have damage, they need to have crowd control. So yeah, out of combat utility, we're only going to give them a 5. Versatility, Sorcerer gets their subclass at level 1, so automatically they're really good as a dip. If you want to dip into Tempest Sorcerer, and then whenever you cast spells, you can reposition yourself. If you want to dip into Draconic Sorcerer to get a little bit of a bonus to your armor class, and then to get some extra spells, that is also very powerful. Even the Shadow Sorcerer is going to be a great dip, which came out from patch 8. To get access to the Darkness spell, which is going to synergize really well with Warlock. Sorcerer Warlock, the Sorlock build or Coffee Lock build, that's pretty common. Also the Sorkadin, which is the Sorcerer Paladin, is a great multi-class combination. So kind of for those reasons, you can play Sorcerer in a multitude of different roles. Even though they're mainly just a pure spellcaster class, if you multi-class, you can do all sorts of different builds with Sorcerer that actually are quite common. And so we're going to give them an 8 out of 10 for versatility. And then for gear, they are relatively dependent on gear just because they need things to bolster their survivability, but they also have meta magic, so they're really strong spellcasters even without any sort of gear. We'll give them a 7 out of 10 for gear. And then fun factor, at least for me, Sorcerer is a very, very fun class to play because you have that customization, that tactical capability with your meta magics. You can choose when you're going to burn these sorcery points to modify your spells. You can choose when you're going to turn your sorcery points into spell slots, or your spell slots into sorcery points. You have that extra layer of depth to your character that is just so much fun to play in Baldur's Gate 3, and for those reasons, we give it a 9 out of 10 for fun. So 39 points, it's almost S+ tier. I'm not going to let my bias take this to S+ tier, but it's very damn close because Sorcerer is almost always good. Now, the only real drawback to Sorcerer is their amount of spells known. So if you take a look over here, you only know 2 spells starting at level 1, and then you only learn 1 spell per level, and you can swap out one of your existing spells. So technically you can learn 2 spells per level, but you have to swap one out. So you're going to feel very limited in your spell selection, and there's a lot of good spells for sorcerers. you're going to have to take mage armor, you're going to have to take shield, and then you got to find out, you know, if there's any other first level spells you want. At second level, hey, maybe you have to swap out one of those first level spells for a second level spell, so you have more options. You're going to be very tight on your picks for spells for Sorcerer, and so really, Sorcerer is the kind of spellcaster, unlike the Wizard, they're pretty much the opposite of the Wizard, where they have very few options, but the options they do have, they can use meta magic, they can make them a lot stronger than other classes. It's just that, again, they have very limited spells known. So keep that in mind. So if you guys need a Sorcerer build, there was a lot of good Sorcerer builds online. I'm going to recommend Spud the King's Fire Sorcerer build, which is able to use Scorching Ray alongside Hold Person to deal insane amounts of burst damage. But there's also my Storm Sorcerer Tempest Cleric build that is going to be really good in the damage department. And then also, if you need more of an AoE based Sorcerer class, there is Morgana Evelyn's Ice Sorcerer class, or Frost Sorcerer, which is hella badass. So tons of great options for Sorcerer builds. A lot of them are damage oriented, but again, you can play Sorcerer however you want because you have meta magic. So alright, so let's go over Warlock. We only have 2 classes left, and the Warlock is going to be that spellcaster class that very much feels unique because of the packed magic and Eldritch invocations you're going to have. So Warlocks are able to channel their patron's packed magic to fight enemies and aid allies in combat. They mainly use Charisma as their spellcasting score, and if we take a look at their class progression, at level 1, they get their subclass. At level 2, they get Eldritch Invocations. And at level 3, they get their Pact Boon. If you don't know what those things are, well, we're going to cover it really quickly. Starting up at level 1, you get access to your Pact, or your Patron, which is going to be basically your subclass. So there's the Archfey, which gives us a little Charm and Frighten AoE ability. There's the Fiend, which gives us temp HP on kill. There's the Goo Warlock, which is the Great Ode one, that will fear enemies if we crit. And then we have the Hexblade Warlock, which is by far the best and introduced from patch 8. This gives us Hex Warrior, where we get proficiency in medium armor and shields. Warlocks normally only get light armor proficiency, so this is great. And then also we get Bind Hex Weapon, where we can make one of our weapons scale with Charisma, and we are unable to be disarmed while they are our Hex Weapon. And then lastly, we get Hexblade's Curse, which is a once per rest ability where you mark an enemy, you curse them, and while they're cursed, you deal extra damage, crit on a higher chance, and also heal if they die. So Hexblade's Curse is fucking honestly crazy, and the Hexblade is very loaded in features just by comparison to all the others. You also get an expanded spell list, and as you can see here, these are the spells you get depending on the subclass you take. At level 2 is when you get Eldritch Invocations, and these are some really nice passive and active abilities where, you know, a lot of these are going to give us modifications to our existing spells, or they're going to let us cast new spells. Agonizing Blast is a classic where you can cast Eldritch Blast. Whenever you do, you get to add your Charisma modifier to the damage it deals. So if you have a +5 to your Charisma mod, then you're going to deal an extra 5 damage per blast. And Eldritch Blast is a cantrip that, as you level up, you get additional beams, which means you get to add on Agonizing Blast multiple times, so it's really strong. There's Armor of Shadows for infinite mage armor. There is Devil Sight to be able to see in magical darkness, and so on and so forth. At level 3, they get Pact of the Blade, Chain, and Tome, their Pact boon. Each one of these are going to do different things. Chain gives you a familiar, Tome is going to give you access to more spells, and Blade is going to give you basically the same stuff as Hexblade weapon, where you're going to be able to scale your weapon with Charisma, and then later on you're going to get extra attack with your Pact weapon. So overall, the Warlock is pretty cool as a spellcaster class. That's kind of a hybrid. Oh, I didn't even mention the fact that they get Warlock spell slots over regular spell slots. So basically, Warlock spell slots, you're going to notice you have way less spell slots over the course of the day, but you get them back on short rest rather than long rest. So at level 1, you only get 1 first level spell slot, but when you take a short rest, you get that first level spell slot back. And, you know, same as all the others once you progress later on. So at level 12 or level 11 is when you get 3 5th level spell slots, and you get all 3 back on a short rest. So that's kind of the trade-off that Warlocks have compared to regular full spellcasters. They get their spell slots back on a short rest rather than a long rest. So if you have a bard in the party, you actually can have quite a bit of high-level spells cast throughout the day, which is definitely something to consider. But if we take a look over to our criteria, our ranking criteria for combat effectiveness, I'm going to give the Warlock I'm going to give the Warlock an 8 out of 10. They have Eldritch Blast, which if you play a blaster type character, spamming Eldritch Blast with Agonizing Blast is going to deal really consistent range damage output. And then of course if you play a Hexblade with Deepen Pack and Shadowblade, you're going to be fucking hitting pretty damn hard on your enemies. So they do pretty good damage both at range and in melee. Out of combat utility, they are Charisma casters. So just like the Sorcerer, they are able to use their Charisma for a variety of different things. Additionally, they do have the invocations, which can help them outside of combat to get extra skill proficiencies or to get additional spells. I'm going to put them at a 6. They're not too high in terms of their out of combat utility, but it's not terrible. And then their versatility, Warlock, they get their subclass at level 1, so they are very versatile. We're going to put them at a good old-fashioned 7, mainly because you only take usually like a 1 or 2 level dip into Warlock. There's not a whole lot of reason, unless you're not playing on honor mode, in which case Deepen Pack does stack with extra attacks, so you can get 3 attacks per turn. That's pretty fucking busted. But if you're playing on honor mode, that doesn't work, so I don't really recommend multi-classing a lot of levels into Warlock. Warlock and Sorcerer, which, you know, turn into Sorlock, that, or Coffee Lock, that is a pretty often used multi-class that can be decent. But because you get a lot of long rests in Baldur's Gate 3, you're not really constrained at all for long rests. Warlock, you kind of lose out on a lot of the value of Warlock being able to have their Warlock pack slots. So, in my opinion, usually you don't dip too much more than one or two levels. In terms of types of builds you can play, mainly damage dealer type builds. You can play support Warlocks, but due to just the lack of spell slots you have, you're going to run out of spell slots pretty much after the first or second turn. So, versatility, I'm going to be a little bit harsh. They're going to be only at a 7 here, but they are good for multi-classing, and they can be used for a variety of different roles. Gear dependency for Warlocks, they're going to be at, I would say, a 6. They're fairly gear dependent. Warlocks, they only have light armor proficiency unless you're Hexblade. So if you do not take Armor of Shadows for mage armor and you don't have medium armor proficiency because you're not a Hexblade Warlock, you will struggle to have decent AC as a Warlock. So there's definitely that to consider. They are a little bit gear dependent in terms of survivability, but in terms of damage output, just with Eldritch Blast, they can do plenty of damage alone. So they aren't too dependent on having a weapon unless you're playing them as a martial, in which case you're going to be using Shadowblade. So again, you aren't that dependent on a weapon. We'll put them at 6 out of 10 here. And then for fun score, Warlocks, they do have a few dialogue options where they can use their patron and they can use their kind of pact, but to be honest, there's really not that many compared to the uses of Paladin and like Barbarian and in their dialogue options. I actually am kind of surprised that I don't see more Warlock dialogue options. There are some cool ones, especially in Act 1, that you can make use of, where you can increase or change your saving throw to like a charisma saving throw. So that definitely does help as well. We're gonna give them a 7 for fun factor. And that's just going to put them a little bit below 35. They're at a score of 34, which is going to be A tier, which, again, in my opinion, kind of makes sense that a lot of the times when you play Warlock, you are usually going to be dipping into other classes. When you take Warlock up to 12th level, you know, you really feel how bad it is to only have 3 spell slots in a fight, because all the other classes, the full spellcaster classes, they're going to have so much more spell slots than you in that fight. And in normal campaigns where rest might be limited, that is going to be a concern, but especially in Act 3, like, there's almost no reason why you would be low on resources before a major fight. You're always going to be rested before that. So Warlocks lose a lot of their value when it comes to the late game, just off the fact that their pack slots are so limited. That's my opinion, but let's talk about builds for Warlock. So if you guys need a Warlock build, you can check out my Shadow Monarch Warlock build, which is basically going to be Hexblade with a mixture of Oathbreaker Paladin to kind of emulate Sung Jin Woo and be a character that's both very strong up close with weapons, but then also has the ability to get undead summons by means of the Revenants and then also through Control Undead. And so that's a really fun, very flavorful build that actually is extremely practical. I used it basically for a full solo honor mode run. And if you want to check that out, you can see the links below for that. All right, so last but certainly not least we have is the Wizard class, the spellcasters, who are the masters of arcane knowledge. They are going to be one of my favorite classes as well, primarily because my first D&D character that I ever played was a wizard. She was a half-elf wizard that mixed ice magic and fire magic depending on her personality for the day. She kind of swapped between two personalities, one being very outgoing and the other one being very cold and calculated. And so I have always had this fondness for wizards, and they are extremely powerful in Baldur's Gate 3, primarily because of patch 8 giving us the Blade Singer subclass, which is a subclass I've used extensively both in Baldur's Gate 3 and in D&D 5e. Now, let's talk about the class progression and what makes the wizard unique. If we take a look at the progression, it seems really empty. So it's basically like subclass features and feats, and not a whole lot else. But the reason for this is because the uniqueness of wizard lies in their spell casting. So at first level, you start off with 6 spells, and every single level you get to learn 2 spells, which is awesome. But also we have a spell book. So with our spell book, we can prepare a certain amount of spells from all of the spells that we know. And we can also scribe spells. So every single time you get a spell scroll, if you want, you can spend gold, 50 gold per level of the spell, and then you can permanently copy that scroll. You'll consume it, and then it'll appear in your spell book, which then you can prepare it and have access to it as much as you want. So basically, in Baldur's Gate 3, you get access to a bajillion spells through spell scrolls, and instead of just using those as one-time consumables, if you have a wizard in the party, they can permanently learn them by spending money, and then you're going to have a wizard who just knows almost all the spells in the game, which is crazy. Having access to a humongous spell list means that, unlike the sorcerer, who is very good at what they can do, actually, let me compare the sorcerer and wizard, because basically the sorcerer is the katana that is very precise. You're only going to know a few spells, but you can use meta magic to make those spells very effective. The wizard is going to be the Swiss Army knife, so you know a ton of spells. You're going to have a spell for every single situation, regardless of what that situation is, and for that reason alone, the wizard is a class that is very versatile and very powerful. Now, at second level, you are going to get access to your subclass, and your subclass is going to give you a lot of the unique features that make the wizard more of a wizard. So we have the Abjuration School, which is going to be great if you want to be a tanky character. They have Arcane Ward, where basically they have an additional way to defend themselves, and they can also project it onto others to defend them. We got Blade Singer, which is added by patch 8. This is a melee-based wizard where you get the access to the Blade Song ability. You get training in War and Song, where you gain proficiency with light armor and a one-handed bladed weapon of your choice. Whenever you go into Blade Song, you're basically going to have increased AC, movement, and a bonus to your acrobatics and constitution saving throws, making you a heck of a lot better at fighting in the front lines and dealing a lot of damage in melee, and even just with spellcasting in general. We've got the Conjuration School and the Necromancy School, if you want to be a character that is more focused on utility or even summoning. Divination, Enchantment, Illusion, Transmutation, those are also going to be more control-based. And then we have the Evocation School if you want to blow things up. You get Sculpt Spell, which basically means that your allies will auto-pass saving throws against your own spells, and they will take no damage from them as they succeed. And so basically the wizard is, again, a very versatile class where each one of these subclasses are going to let you specialize in a different thing. But regardless, you're always going to have access to a ton of spells through your spell book as a prepared caster. So that's super awesome and very, very powerful. Let's go over the ranking criteria. Looking at combat effectiveness for Wizard, it is a 9, an actual 9 out of 10. I would say that before patch 8, Wizard is an 8. It still actually is very, very powerful, especially with the magic missile combos and all sorts of other different spells you can take advantage of. If you cast Cone of Code after you have wet your enemies, it's going to deal double damage. If you cast Hold Person on an enemy and then blast them with Scorching Ray or something equivalent to that, you're going to deal a ton of damage to them. So they're similar to the Sorcerer in terms of the spell combinations they can do. It's just they're a little bit slower because they don't have access to Quicken Spell like Sorcerer does. So they're not going to be nearly on that level of Sorcerer when it comes to damage output, but Wizard can still excel in its own ways, and especially after patch 8, we get access to a certain spell called Shadow Blade. Before patch 8, you used to need Arabelle's Ring to cast Shadow Blade, but now it's just a spell that you can learn as a wizard, as a warlock, as other classes. And whenever you cast this spell at 2nd level, which is the base level for this spell, it's going to be a weapon that appears in your hand that does 2d8 plus your strength or dex mod psychic damage. That's great. It's actually very strong at that level. But if you upcast to 3rd or 4th level, it's going to do 3d8 damage, and if you upcast to 5th or 6th level, it's going to deal 48 plus your strength or dex mod psychic damage. And the reason why this weapon is so fucking good, even though the base damage is already very high, what makes it even better is the fact that the Resonance Stone exists, which you can get in Act 2. It's going to be an aura that you have around you whenever you have this item equipped that it will apply Steeped in Bliss where enemies are vulnerable to psychic damage. So with this alongside Shadow Blade, your attacks will deal 8d8 psychic damage plus your dex mod. Fucking absolutely crazy, genuinely pretty broken. And for those reasons, we're gonna put Wizard at a 9. It's not quite at 10, but it's damn close. I would say it's very, very close. Now, out of combat utility for the Wizard is fantastic. As I said, there's a Swiss Army knife. You have the knock spell to unlock doors if you don't have a character that has good lockpicking. You got Find Familiar to scout around and look around like a druid would. You have access to Dimension Door if you need to quickly get out of a fight or get into one. And yeah, they just have tons of different utility-based spells. They're also intelligence characters, which means they get to be good at Arcana, Investigation, History. These are skills that your team typically doesn't have anyone who's good at those skills, so they're going to be good value in terms of that. We're going to give them a solid 8 out of 10 for the Wizard. And then looking at versatility, we are again very versatile. In fact, we're versatile than most of the other classes. With the addition, patch 8 was just huge for Wizard. With the addition of Bladesinger, now we can play a melee Wizard, we can play a Spellblade. You can play tank, you can play Abjuration, you can play the Blaster, the Exploder with the Evocation, you can play Summoner with Necromancy, you can play Control with Enchantment. So they really can fill pretty much every niche except for a healer, but they don't need to heal because they're able to just knock enemies unconscious or confuse them or put them to sleep. So Wizard pretty much is going to be the only class, I believe, that gets a 10 for its versatility because of the fact that you get access to every single spell scroll in the game. That is a spell that you can then scribe into your book and learn, and you can have access to 50, 60 spells that, well, I mean, you can only prepare X amount of spells, but you're going to be able to prepare from a list of 60 spells or so because there's just that many spell scrolls in the game that you easily will get access to throughout your playthrough that you can then scribe into your book. Now, gear dependency, you do need a lot of spell scrolls and a lot of gold to be able to learn those spell scrolls, and you're going to need decent equipment because, you know, you'll have mage armor and shield, but if you play Bladesinger, that's still not going to be enough alongside your Blade Song to stay alive in the front lines. If you're playing on honor mode, you're going to need additional equipment, additional gear, usually a lot of consumables. Wizard really needs a lot of consumables to stay alive, and for those reasons they are pretty damn gear dependent. We're going to put them at a 6 for gear dependency. And then last but not least, the fun factor for Wizards. If you like playing a character who's going to be very tactical and very smart, and you're going to actually think about what spells you're going to bring to a battle and how you're going to apply them, then the Wizard is the class for you. And that's kind of the reason why I think the Wizard is so fun, because you really do put a lot more thought into how you're going to use your spells compared to other characters. So say, for example, you're playing a Sorcerer, you already have such a small spell list, like you're only bringing the spells that you know to the fight because you don't have prepared spell casting, so you don't have to worry at all about what spell you're going to cast in the battle. You usually just have one spell for each situation. If you're playing something like a Druid or a Cleric, your spell list is a little bit more limited, where you only are going to have Command and Hold Person for control, or you're only going to have, you know, Cure Wounds and Mass Cure Wounds for healing. You don't have to put too much thought into what spells you use in combat. But Wizard really is the one where you're going to spend a lot more effort in terms of thinking about what you're going to do before you actually get into a fight. And for those reasons, I just adore the Wizard. I have a lot of fun with it. We're going to give him an 8 out of 10, and that's going to put our score at 41, making Wizard the only other class besides Druid that is an S+ rank. And I think that makes sense. A Wizard is a class that you can certainly have for any party and make very good use of them. So if you guys need a build for Wizard, I'm actually going to highly recommend Nizar GG's Ice Wizard build. It's a crazy multi-class. It is Warlock and Cleric, and then mainly Wizard, Abjuration Wizard, to make a character that's actually very tanky and has a ton of AoE, Ice AoE, that you can really take advantage of to both CC enemies by creating ice surfaces, but also dealing a ton of damage if those enemies are wet or chilled, because they'll take double damage to code. So very strong build. Check that out if you guys are interested in a powerful Wizard build. And if you want a melee Wizard build, then you can check out my Bladesinger build, because that is going to be taking advantage of the patch 8 Bladesinger, making a Gish character who is incredibly powerful at all points of the game. So either way, some good build options for Wizard. Check those out. All right, so I have put together the tier list now, because, you know, who doesn't love seeing an actual tier list? If you made it all the way to the end of the video and you've watched everything up until now, God bless you. I genuinely can't thank you enough for supporting the channel and for enjoying the content here. And if you're someone who's just skipped to the ending, well, congratulations. We are going to recap everything. We're going to go over the classes and, again, just talk a little bit about them, about what I like about the class, maybe what I don't like about the class, and why you would want to play the class. So we have the tier list here. The S+ tier classes are Wizard and Druid, and I do actually need to explain why they are S tier, because for some people, maybe if you haven't played these classes before, it might seem a little bit odd, especially comparing it to things like the Sorcerer and the Paladin, who are just really, really fucking strong in combat. There's reasons why the Wizard and the Druid are taken up a notch, and they have entered the spot of S+ tier, which means I think they can fill any comp. They're 100% relevant at all times. There is going to be reasons for that, and let's go over the actual list here. So this is where we did the ranking criteria. For those of you who are just catching up, please check the link in the description below if you want a copy of this Excel spreadsheet. It's going to have all the data that I've shown in the video so far, and also I've made a column here for the recommended builds. So why you should use this class is going to be a little funny, witty blurb here, but then also the recommended build based upon if you do want to check out this class and you need something to work with or something to inspire you on how you want to play your character, then I'm going to have links for that all available in this spreadsheet. So please check that out if you do find this video helpful. Barbarian is going to be a solid S tier. It's got a score of 37, and why you should play, or why you might want to play Barbarian, is because talking is really hard and smashing is really fucking easy. If you want to just break people, literally front kick them off of cliffs like a Spartan, then Barbarian is the one for you. The Frost Giant Barb, the Throw Zerker Barbarian, these are going to be super powerful. Throwing weapons in general are just downright busted because of Tavern Brawler in Baldur's Gate 3, and so Barbarian is a class that is very fun in the ways that you get to deal damage, because you're literally like just picking shit up and throwing it at people, and then you can also just throw people around like they're toys. But also they're very fun because they're dialogue options. So all of the Barbarian dialogue options, of which there are many, they're very flavorful, they're super fucking funny, and they just let you do cool Barbarian shit. So Barbarian, easy S tier for me. Now looking at Bard, Bard is going to be one of those classes that we gave a 10 for the out of combat utility, and that's because of Bardic Inspiration. Not only is this a great tool for bolstering other people's skill checks, but it's also really good at bolstering saving throws. And if you're doing the Necromancies of Thay, if you're in the Githyanki Kriege, if you are doing a critical saving throw that you want to pass, getting that Bardic Inspiration die is usually the best way, outside of Aura of Protection, of course, to help you out with those critical saving throws or critical skill checks. That Bardic die is super, super nice. They also get skill expertise and Jack of all trades, so they're really good at skill checks in general, and then they're also spellcasters with magical secrets. So Bard is just one of those classes that really has a lot of versatility depending on what the party needs, and you can also play them as melee characters, as a swords bard, or you can play them as a control caster, as a lore bard. So they have a score of 38, and I very much think it makes sense that they're S tier. Why you might want to play a bard? Well, if you want to seduce a door and actually succeed in doing it, not that you can do this in Baldur's Gate 3, but you can do some other really sketchy things, Bard is definitely going to be for you. It's really for those who want to play that charismatic, funny character, but also be very strong as well. And looking at our next class, which is going to be Cleric, we have another contender for S tier. I mean, you've already seen the tier list. We have a lot of classes in S tier. Cleric is of course also going to be S tier because it is a very well-rounded class as well. It's a little bit more offensive, where clerics have really good spells for combat. They have Toll the Dead now as of patch 8, which is a fantastic cantrip for dealing damage. They're going to have a lot of out-of-combat utility just from being able to cast Enhance Ability and casting Guidance on people. They also have a variety of different builds you can play them as. You can play them as melee, range, support, healing, control. Really lots of good options here. I actually recommend the Light Domain Cleric the most. I have a build for that. And the Light Domain Cleric is basically going to be able to use Radiating Orb to debuff enemies while also dealing tons of radiant and fire damage to your enemies to get them closer to death and make your party's life a lot easier. And so why you should play clerics? Because your god said so, and now everyone else does too. Basically, if you want to play a character who worships a deity, if you're familiar with the lore of Faerun, you want to play a character who serves the tenets of a deity, you can actually use dialogue options and bring up your faith, your religion. So that's pretty cool. And of course, you can play Shadowheart, who has a very intricate story related to Shar throughout the campaign of Baldur's Gate 3. And so the clerics, they get a lot of love in terms of just Shadowheart's backstory because of the way they integrated the background and Shar within the game. So for those reasons, it's got a score of 36. It is S tier. Druid is our first S plus tier. And for those of you who are wondering why Druid is S plus tier, is because Druid is the only class, even compared to Monk and Barbarian, that does not need gear. We gave it a 10 for gear score because Druid is a class, Moon Druid specifically, is a class that you can play without any gear from Act 1 all the way up until Act 3 and still be very relevant on Honor Mode difficulty. Druid gets Wild Shape, and even if you're not playing a Moon Druid, you're still going to get access to some pretty powerful Wild Shapes. The Owlbear Wild Shape is god tier, it's goated, it's insane because of its leaping attack thing that scales the damage with gravity and your size so that you can deal absolutely crazy things. You can have kaiju monster battles as a druid, and that alone makes it S plus tier. But, you know, check out Garson's Moon Druid Barbarian build if you want to see more on that. You should play Druid if you've always wondered what it's like to fight Evil's Badger. You've got these funny and wacky and veiny wild shapes that you can use, and you don't even have to use them in combat. You can use them outside of combat to get into burrow holes, to scout around, to get information. But of course, the Druid is just a class that I think very easily can mesh itself into other parties because you can play the tank, you can play the healer, you still are a full spellcaster despite having access to Wild Shape, which can put you in the front lines even though you are normally perhaps a squishy spellcaster. And the Druid spell list, if you know how to use these spells, Freedom of Movement, Plant Growth, Spike Growth, Entanglement, if you are able to capitalize on these spells, which a lot of which are concentration that you can still maintain concentration on while you're wild shaped, then you're super effective in battle. So Druid is S plus tier, no doubt in my mind about it, and it is primarily because of that multitude of factors that makes them very powerful, especially without gear, so that all your other characters can get gear, or if you're just straight up lazy, you don't have to worry about getting them out. Now, Fighter is our next class. This is going to be S tier, and it has a score of 35. Fighter really is the class that if you want to make a lot of attacks, you just want to hit things, and you want to hit things a lot, then Fighter is the class for you. Action Surge is our GOAT. It lets us make use of extra attack multiple times in a single turn, which is really good in Honor Mode difficulty. And although they don't bring anything to the table outside of combat, maybe besides like dex-based skills, they're still just so good, and they excel at combat so much, they make up for that. Really not too much to say about Fighter. They're very straightforward, just smacking the shit or shooting the shit out of people. And if we go to Monk, it's a very similar case too. They have the exact same score of 35, and they're S rank. Monk is basically the class that you want to play if you want to just punch the crap out of people, and Tavern Brawler makes Monk incredibly strong, very accurate, and very high damage. They also have Stunning Strike, which fighters don't have, and Stunning Strike is fucking amazing. You can spend a key point. If they fail a con save, they get stunned, where all attacks against them have advantage, and they don't get to do anything on their turn. Monk getting access to Stunning Strike already puts them in S tier, and yeah, pretty easy way to explain their score. Now, next up we have is the Paladin. You should play a Paladin if you want to be a holy warrior and you also want to struggle keeping your tenants, because my god, is there a lot of great choices that are very, very evil. You have a lot of options to play a genuinely evil character, despite the Cleric and the Paladins being characters that by default are supposed to be lawful or follow order and tenets, right? So it's pretty awesome that we have access to some evil options, and you can break your oath and become an oath breaker. That by itself makes this class a lot more fun, a lot more flavorful. In combat, they're just super strong because of Smite and the fact that long rests are not really much of an issue in Baldur's Gate 3. If you conserve your resources, you're going to have that full rest before a big fight. And you're going to be able to just drop spell slots on smites and deal tons of damage, especially on crits. Paladins can deal some of the highest Nova damage in the game off of their 5th level smites, which are going to deal 6d8 radiant damage, doubled to 12d8, and then doubled to 14, or increased to 14d8 if it's a fiend or undead. Absolutely crazy that they can do so much burst damage. So yeah, 38 points, S tier. Ranger is our only class in B tier. We're going to scroll back to the list. You can see we have a few classes that are not in S tier. And the reason for that is because there are some kind of major drawbacks that are going to hold them back compared to the other classes and would, otherwise prevent me from recommending them 100 or most of the time. So looking at the Ranger, we can see I kind of put them pretty low for versatility, for gear, for even their combat effectiveness, because the Ranger, it really struggles to have a unique identity outside of its subclass. So the subclass is great. The Swarmkeeper, I think, is very flavorful. It has a lot of cool options, unique options, where you can actually use CC on enemies, and that's really nice. And then the Gloomstalker is going to be good for damage, and the Beastmaster is going to be a good if you want a little animal companion. If you want to play a character that has an animal companion, by all means, play the Ranger, the Beastmaster. If you play Druid and you were like, this is a little bit too complicated, I don't want to deal with wild shape, and I just want to shoot stuff, then Ranger is going to be the class for you. But just keep in mind that compared to the Fighter, compared to the Paladin, compared to the other classes we mentioned, you're not going to deal as much damage, because a lot of the Ranger's damage features, they are limited. So for example, the Swarmkeeper, it can only apply its swarm effect once per turn, or once per attack, even once per turn. And then the Gloomstalker Ranger is only going to get its ability proccing off the Dreadful Stalker or Dread Ambusher. That's only going to proc on the first turn of combat. So really their damage potential is so much more limited than a lot of the other classes and subclasses. And just based off that reason alone, I think they are far weaker in comparison. And you should only pick them if you kind of have a good idea of what you're doing, if you're on honor mode difficulty. Otherwise, you might actually struggle to keep up in damage in Act 2 and in Act 3. Now, same thing for the Rogue. The Rogue has a much higher score of 33, but that is only A tier. And the reason why is because Sneak Attack, although it is good, especially in the early game, it's a very consistent damage output in the early game. It gets outscaled very quickly because in Baldur's Gate 3, we have access to some crazy fucking weapons. I mean, all the legendaries that you can get in Baldur's Gate 3, you can get legendary as early as at the end of Act 1 at the Githyanki Creech. So it's like you can get access to some really strong weapons that are going to quickly outscale the damage if you're playing a character that has extra attack. And unfortunately, Rogue is the only martial class that doesn't have extra attack, and it really starts to fall behind towards the end of Act 2 and Act 3. Your damage output is nowhere near as high as the other classes, because even if you take Sharpshooter, you're only going to get that plus 10 damage on one attack. If someone has extra attack, they already get one extra attack over you, which means they deal in another plus 10 damage from Sharpshooter. So anything that has extra attack is just going to end up outpacing you. And I mean, I kind of just repeated myself on that point, but Rogue is still great if you want to play a character that's stealthy, if you want to play a character that's going to apply skills, right? So if you want someone who is going to be stealing everything from the vendors, then Rogue is the go-to. And there is a really cool Swashbuckler build by Wayfaring Nomad that I think is quite relevant throughout most portions of the game. Swashbuckler, you can use its bonus action attack almost as like an extra attack, so that's kind of the workaround for it. But yeah, Rogue, in my opinion, compared to all the other classes we mentioned, it's just not going to be as absolutely disgusting in the late game. But it's still great. It's still great. So Sorcerer, that is going to be our next class. It is S tier, and it has a score of 39. It was very, very close for S plus tier, and I am a little bit biased because I love Sorcerer so much. But if you want to play a character that, as I already said, is the katana of spellcasters, where you know very few spells, but the spells you do know are absolutely busted because of meta magic, then Sorcerer is a great pick for you. And actually, I kind of want to scratch that, because Sorcerers can still cast spells through spell scrolls, and they can still use meta magic on those spell scrolls. So they're almost a little bit better in the Wizard, in the sense that if you have the goad to buy a shit ton of spell scrolls, those are one-time use, so you really can't make use of them more than once unless you're actually refreshing vendors and then stockpiling spell scrolls. Sorcerer is just really, really, really fucking good in combat, like just insanely good. If you cast extended spell on Globe of Invulnerability, your party is untouchable for like 5 turns, 6 turns. It's kind of crazy. And then if you cast Twin Spell on Chain Lightning, you can chain the targets together so that you're double hitting them with Chain Lightning and just obliterating a small group of enemies. Or if you cast Quicken Spell and then you cast Fireball multiple times, you can just clear battlefields. It's really disgusting how strong Sorcerer is. And yeah, it's borderline on S plus tier. It honestly could be S plus tier. I could justify it as S plus tier, but I'm not going to let my bias get in the way. So S tier, 39 points. It is at the tippity top. And the next up we're going to have is Warlock. Warlock, unfortunately, it only had a score of 34. It was just under S tier. And I think the main reason for that, what really holds Warlock back, is the fact that long rests are so plentiful in Baldur's Gate 3. And so Warlock, if you don't know, they get pack slots. They have way less spell slots than every other class, a spellcaster class, but they get those spell slots back on a short rest. And although you can get short rests a lot throughout the day, especially with Bard, you just get long rests a lot more. And whenever you have a big fight and you need spell slots, you can almost certainly take a long rest before that and have full spell slots. So Warlock really starts to fall behind when you're in a big endgame fight in Act 3, and your Wizard can cast 3 3rd level spells, 3 4th level spells, 2 5th level spells, 1 6th level spell, but the Warlock only gets to cast 3 5th level spells. It's like that disparity, like you basically run out of spell slots in the first or second turn, whereas the Wizard still has gas for days of the combat. So unfortunately, that really holds Warlock back compared to most of the other spellcasters. I will say Hexblade, absolutely disgusting dip for any sort of paladin or any charisma based character that wants to use weapons. Very, very strong. The Hexblade is added by patch 8, and it makes Warlock a heck of a lot stronger. If I ever did a subclass tier list, I mean, Hexblade would be very high up there. So unfortunately though, when we're looking at the classes as a whole and comparing one another, they're only going to be A tier. Now we have the Wizard, last but not least. And the Wizard, of course, this is the Swiss Army knife of spellcasters. If you have gotten your spell scrolls and scribed them into your book, by the time you're in Act 3, you will have a lot of spells that your Wizard can cast. And that kind of is the reason why they're so great. The reason why they're S plus tier. Well, actually, the main reason why they're S plus tier is because Bladestinger got added by patch 8, and now they're insanely good damage dealers on top of also being really well-rounded spellcasters. But, take a look at NazarGG's Ice Wizard build. This is a much older build, and it's disgustingly strong too. You're super tanky as a spellcaster, and you also just shell out tons of AoE damage that also acts as crowd control. You can do the same thing on Sorcerer, but it's really freaking hilarious on Wizard because of the interactions with your Arcane Ward. So Wizard is just one of those classes that, to me, has a lot of versatility in playstyle, and additionally, it's really well-rounded, where you can play that Gish the Spellblade, you can play a support summoner, you can play a controller. It's really up to you how you want to build your Wizard and adapt that for the needs of the party. That's kind of what sets apart the S plus classes from the others. If you play a fighter and your party needs a support character, your options are going to be a lot more limited than if you played a Wizard. If you were playing a Cleric, well, no, Cleric's pretty well rounded, I'll be honest. If you're playing something like a Rogue, but then your party is going to need a frontline tank. You can actually use the wizard as that tank, as an evasion tank blade singing, or as a ward tank with the abjuration. Like, it's very shocking how well-rounded the wizard is, and for those reasons I think it is an S+ tier. So that's going to be pretty much it for the video. Those are all my thoughts. I can't think of anything else much that I really want to talk about. But yeah, if you want to see all the details in this spreadsheet, please check the link in the description below and you can get a copy of it. You can check out all of these builds here, the recommended builds here. These are from other content creators. Some of these are obviously my builds. We have the Arcane Archer build, the Light Domain Cleric build, my Hexblade Lightning Sorcerer. A lot of these are my builds, but then a lot of these are from other content creators for Baldur's Gate 3. Who I definitely respect, and they have really awesome, incredible builds as well that I would love for you guys to check out. So I hope you found this video useful. Hopefully you were planning on a new playthrough of Baldur's Gate 3, and this has gotten you to decide on what you want to play next. I think my next video I want to make for Baldur's Gate 3 is what my personal pick would be for like a 4-person party in honor mode. I think that would be a pretty interesting video that would help you guys out. But let me know if you guys have any videos that you would like me to make. If there's a certain build you want, if there's a certain class that you'd like me to make a build on, by all means, leave a comment below. I will definitely take a look at it and try to get back to you on that. But yeah, that's pretty much everything I had for today. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Let's bring it back over to the tier list if I can find my scroll bar. But yeah, that's going to be it for our tier list video. So that is the definitive class tier list for Baldur's Gate 3. Hope you guys enjoyed. I will see you in the next one. Peace.